Morning one, Manalif from Manalif, at the bottom, 51a, 2 lines from the bottom. Omer of Nachman. Rav Nachman said that Beis HaRechem, when a animal is born and comes out of the womb, so coming out, Ein bo mishum risuke avarim. There's no concern that its limbs may have gotten crushed. In other words, normally when there's a concern that the limbs may have gotten crushed, we are required to check certain things and see if it can last for a certain amount of time. but on when a child's born, even though it's being crushed as it come out to an extent, we're not worried about any fallout, any problems. Amle Rav of Nachman. So Rav told Rav Nachman, who said this, Tani de Mesayelach, I have a proof for you. It's a Tinuk ben Yom Echad, a baby 1 day old, Matame Ziva, is Matame. He does get impure if he sees a Ziva, an irregular flow. And if you're going to say there is a risuke evarim, there's a concern that we may have gotten crushed. Ikrikan, we should say over here, in other words, when someone becomes impure because of ziva, it has to be that there were no outside causes. They just came from itself, and nothing else, no outside causes caused it. But when the child's born and you say that we're concerned that the limbs may have gotten crushed as born, so then that should be the other purpose. That should be the reason that it happened. That it didn't happen on its own, and he should not become tummy. He should not become impure. Ikrikan mipsaro, it has to come from his flesh on its own. V'lo machmas on, so not because of another reason. And over here, there's another reason. So it must be that we're not concerned that its limbs may have gotten crushed when it was born. So here we're dealing with a case going to Yatsa derech dofen. No, it was removed through a cesarean section, a C-section, and in such a case, there was no chance for it to get crushed as it came out. And that's the only case we're saying that a child can be matami, can become impure with ziva. Tashima egal shenol b'yamtiv. If a calf was born on yamtiv, shochtanos b'yamtiv, they can slaughter it, they can shecht it on yamtiv to eat. And if it was born and we're concerned that its limbs may have gotten crushed through when it was born, then we should not be able to shecht it, because there should be a concern that it might be treifim and it might not be good, and therefore we shouldn't shecht it in Yom Tov, we shouldn't slaughter in Yom Tov. So from the fact that we could, must be that we're not concerned that its limbs may have gotten crushed when it was being born. So the answer is no. That mission over there is also talking about when it's born through a cesarean section, a C-section. Tashma v'shavin shem nolad hu umumo imo. Now we try to bring another proof that they agree. It says in the Mishnah that they agree that if a bechar was born with a mum, in other words, the bechar is a firstborn domesticated animal, a firstborn animal, and one's required to give it to the kohen, and it has certain dinim, certain rules like a carbon. And if it has and you cannot eat it, has to be brought as a carbon, as a sacrifice. But if it has blemishes on it, if it has a mum, then it can be eaten because of the mum. But if it develops a mum on Yom Tov, it develops a blemish on Yom Tov, then we have a concept that it wasn't considered prepared at the beginning of Yom Tov, and therefore you cannot use it now. But if it was born on Yom Tov, and it was born with the blemish, so that we say then min hamuchen, it is considered ready, it is considered prepared. So maybe you want to say over here that it also was a C-section, and that's why we're not worried about the limbs being crushed, because if we wouldn't be able to shecht it. So there are dofen mikdash. The Gemara says no, because if it comes out through a C-section, then it's not considered a kadosh animal, a holy animal. It's not considered a kedushas bechor. It doesn't have the standards of a firstborn. So it must be that it came out the regular way, and still we're not concerned that maybe its limbs got crushed. So Gemara asks, "Amar Rabbi Yochanan Modei Shimon Leinian Kachim She'eno Kadosh." That's what we're asking. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan agrees that by kachim it does not become kadosh by holy things, by things that are considered kachim, things of mizbeach and carbon related. There, it doesn't have a status of hektish of carbon ready unless it doesn't have if it was born through a C-section. So it must have been born normally. And still we see we're not concerned that maybe its limbs got crushed. So the Gemara says over here, over here, it either stood on top of the ground or walked on top of the ground and showed us that it was able to move around to function properly, and therefore we're not concerned that its limbs got crushed. But if it would not be able to, then perhaps we would be concerned. Okay, that was one discussion of what Rav Nachman said, that Beis HaRechem ein bo misham risuk avarm, that when a calf is born, we're not worried that it may have gotten crushed inside. Rav Nachman says another thing. Beis HaMitbachim, in the slaughterhouse, when they sometimes, in order to get the animals down, they have to throw it down to the floor. Sometimes it can be a little hard. So he said maybe we're concerned over there for its limbs that may get crushed. No, over there we're not worried that maybe its limbs get crushed. Ha'utu, or the nafal, there was a shor, an ox, the nafal that fell. Vishtama called ginichoseh. It says negichoseh, but they changed it to ginichoseh. It fell, and they heard it screaming, which would seem to imply that it got hurt. So he came in and he ate from the best parts of the meat to show that it's kosher, that it is okay. So no one else should be nervous. Where do you know this from? This is what Rav says. It sticks its fingernails, so to speak, into the ground until it reaches the ground. In other words, it holds itself up and it prevents itself from getting hurt. That's similar to what we saw earlier. One of the reasons why we would permit an animal that fell from a high area is because maybe it has something to hang on to. So similar here, that it sticks its hooves, its nails into the ground to give it support, so it shouldn't get hurt when it falls. Yehuda said in the name of Rav that if it stood up, if we had a concern that maybe it was crushed, and then it stood up, then you don't need it to keep it for 24 hours. There's another way of checking to see if it's okay is by keeping it around for 24 hours. But if it stood up, you don't need to do that. But you need to check in the insides to see that nothing happened. You need to check in the spinal cord and the ribs, which we'll see when it could be a problem. And a few other things that you have to check to make sure that nothing got hurt, got damaged. But if it walked, so that's all if it stood. But if it walked, you don't even need to check it. Rav Chia Barav said, regardless whether it walked or whether it stood, you still need to check inside, check around to make sure that it didn't get damaged or hurt. Rav Yirmiyah Baracha, so Rav Yirmiyah quoted, Rav Yirmiyah Baracha said, in the name of Rav, Pash the Yad Lamod, if let's say it stuck out its hand to stand, its front leg to stand, even though it didn't actually stand, or or it stuck out its back legs to walk, even though it didn't actually walk, that's considered enough to show that it's not crushed, it's not damaged. Rav Chizda says, if it it stirred a little to get up, it started moving a little to get up, even though it didn't actually stand up, then that's already considered that it's okay. It's out of danger. It's not considered a hurt animal anymore. V'hilchasa. This is the question whether it's actually from the Gemara or maybe it's from this Nagar Sasheri. Says it's the lashon of the poskim. In other words, it's later people brought this down and wrote it in the Gemara to paskin Allah. V'hilchasa heichad anafla min hagag, when it fell from the roof below yada, and where it didn't know that it was falling, it didn't realize it. And it stood up and it did not walk. Then you do have to check inside to see what happened, what may have happened. But you don't have to keep it for 24 hours to see him. And if it actually walked, then you don't even need to check it. So Rav Dimi quoted Rav Dimi from Narda. So what do you need to check by a nefula when something falls, when an animal falls? You need to check the intestines area. But this is what we say in the name of Rav Papa. You need to check it. Connected the whole. You have to check the whole insides. You have to check for broken bones and for other stuff, not just the intestines area. Siman mai. So do you have to check the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, that's the simanim that we cut. Two simanim. My amalei simanim kashe netzel nefila. No, they're considered hard, like regarding falling. In other words, they're not going to get hurt just from falling, so you don't have to check them. Yedidya Mashmuel said, "Of shenechbat al gabe mayim." So we're talking about nefula. If an animal falls, it can get hurt. So let's say a bird is falling, and nechbat al gabe mayim, it hit the water. Kevin sheshat melo kamasa. So we see if it can swim, it hits the water and then lands in the water. If it swims the height of the bird, then die. That's enough. That's enough to prove that it didn't get hurt. Below Amaran, and we only said that this works to check if it's can swim. It can swim is element if it's against the current, it's upstream. But if going downstream with the flow of the water, is just the water is just throwing it along. It's coming along with the water, and that's not going to prove anything. That's not going to prove that it didn't get hurt. Kaimi. And if it's still water, then even if it flows upstream, it's not upstream, even if it flows from a lower area to a higher area, it still shows that it's not hurt. Wherever it swims, it's okay. It's a proof that it's not hurt. And if there's wood in there, there's wood chips in the water, and it's going down. The bird is going downstream, but it swim and ahead of the wood chip that's flowing with the current. So we prove that it didn't get crushed because it went ahead of the wood. You see that it's flowing, it's swimming faster than the current, and which shows that it didn't get hurt. Galima masiach, if there's a clothing that's stretched out, it's pulled tight, and the bird hit that. And then we are worried that it may have gotten crushed. But if it's tied from two ends and it's not tight, then we're not worried because it's not as much that when it hits it, there's not as much force, and it's not going to hurt it as much. Ofuma ofef. Let's say the cloth is folded over, even if it's stretched, so it's not completely. It's still a little flappy, I guess. Lo chashin, over there we're not worried when the bird hits it because it doesn't have so much force. Because when it's folded over, it cannot be stretched out properly. Isla, if a bird fell into a net that's spread out in the air, if it hit the net, a makarvi kitri, and it has knots that are next to each other, they're chashinan because it may have hit one of the knots and gotten hurt. Lo makarvi kitri, if they're not next to each other, lo chashinan, there we're not worried. Kitna, if there's pish and there's flax, david batune, it's made into bundles, and the bird hit these bundles, hit the flax and the bundles. Since it's a hard thing, chashinan, we're worried that it may have gotten hurt. The haigis of the haigisa, but if it hit the sides of it, lo chashinan, we're not worried because it doesn't have so much force, and it's not going to hurt it as bad. Isuraisa, if you have the bundles of reeds, chashinan, it's hard, and we're worried when the bird hits the bundle that it may have gotten hurt. Kitna, the daik v'nafis. If you have kitna, again flax, that the daik v'nafis, it's beat out and combed out, then lo chashinan, we're not worried because it's a soft thing already. It's all cleaned out. Daik v'lo nafis, if it's if it pounded and not nafis combed out, chashinan, then we are worried. Then we are worried because it's still hard. It's still hard, and there is force when the bird hits it, and therefore we're worried that the limbs may have gotten hurt. The avid bizri, if it's made a certain way, I'm not exactly sure what this way is. The avid bizri, and it's a certain way that if it came in, they could make kitri. It's made into bundles. Mm-hmm. If it's made into bundles, Kevan, since there's not chayshinan, we're worried about this. The kata, when there's the leftovers of the stalks that come out of the flax, something falls out, and those are together chayshinan. We're worried when it hits the dak the kasa. So this is the same thing that comes from the flax, but it's much thinner, it's much smaller. So those are much finer. It's not going to hurt the bird when it hits it. Lo chayshinan, we're not worried that the bird may have gotten hurt when it hits it. Navra is a certain thing that type of plant that grows around palm trees, and they dry it out and they divide it into strips, and they make it into ropes. But as long as it's not made into strips, it's still hard. So if a bird hits that, chayshinan, we're worried that it may have gotten hurt. Tim chasab, once they divide it into the strips, lo chayshinan, and then there it's much softer, and we're not worried that the bird may get hurt when it hits it. Kitma nihila, if it's sifted out with a sieve. Sifted ash. If you have ash and you sift it, chayshinan, we're worried because it's the only thing left are hard. Low nil, if it's not crushed, lo chayshinan, because it's not going to hurt it as much. It doesn't have such force. Chol ada. Now let's continue on to the Beis and Aleph. When you have sand that's thin, fine sand, lo chayshinan, we're not worried when it hits the chol agas. When it's coarse sand, then it may hurt it when it impacts it. Chayshinan, then we are worried when the bird hits it that it may have gotten hurt. Avak drachim, this is there's some dirt on the waist, on the way it's coarse and it's hard. Chayshinan, then we're worried that when the bird hits it, it may have gotten hurt. Tivna, if there's straw, avid bezaga, and it's made in a bundle. Chayshinan, then we're worried because it may hurt it. Law of bezaga, if it's not made in a bundle. Lo chayshinan, we're not worried. If it's wheat, and anything similar to wheat, for example, spelt, which of these things are hard, or sari, or barley, and anything that's similar to it. Chayshinan, then in such a case we are choshesh, because those are hard, and when the bird impacts it, it has a force that it can hurt it. Kulmine kidneys, all types of legumes that aren't, all types of legumes, they're round, and it slips on the sides of them, and when it hits it, it doesn't have so much force, it's not going to hurt it. Labarm and rubia, except for rubia is a certain type of legume that apparently doesn't have this quality. Chimtzi, another something, I'm not sure what it is, but it's smooth and it's not going to hurt it. It doesn't. There's no problem with arm. We're not worried that it may crush the birds.
I call it peas.
It's okay. Yeah, thank you. Chimtzi is peas. Ein moshe arm because it's round and it's not going to hurt it. Yesh chifzi. That's something else, but it's not round.
Chifzi is chickpeas.
Okay, thank you. Chifzi is chickpeas. Yesh arm. There is a problem of that it may get crushed because it's not completely round, and it may hurt it on the side, and it can't just slip off. So we're worried over there that if it hit it, then it may have gotten hurt. Low mishrik. So anything, clothe the mill. So the rule is kol midi the mishrik, anything that'll slip off of that when the bird comes into contact with it, it's not gonna impact with such a force because it'll slip along and continue, and there's no actual impact. There's no concern that the Evarim may get crushed. Lo mishrik yesh mishum mesuk Evarim. But if there's no if it doesn't slip, yesh mishum mesuk Evarim, there is a concern that it may get crushed. Davuk. So let's say the bird is attached, the one wing is attached to something. Ravashi Shori, and then it flew with that, it fell with that. Rashi said it's still okay. Rameimer said with one wing, even with one wing, it's a problem. Even if one wing's attached to something, it's going to be a problem. The Kulam lo pligi. The Shori. Sorry, Davuk, if it's attached to Rashi, Shori, Rashi says it's okay. Rameimer says it's not okay. So what is the machlokas? The Gemara is going to say, what is the machlokas talking about? B'chad gafa, when one wing's attached to something, the kulam lo pligi d'shari. Everyone agrees that it's permitted. because it's only 1 wing. He can always fly with the other wing and prevent himself from getting hurt too badly. Keep betray gapi. When do they argue? When both wings are attached to something, and it can't really fly. So the one that says that it's prohibited. So how's it going to get? How's it going to prevent itself from hurting itself? It's going to get hurt if it's both wings. No, it has the edges of the wings, the tips of the wings that it can help itself with. It can prevent itself from getting hurt with the tips of the wing, and therefore he says even when both wings are attached and he doesn't have use of both of them, it's still going to be permitted. There are those that say that when both wings are attached to this board, then everyone agrees that it's prohibited. When they argue with one wing, when one wing is attached to something and then it flies and it falls, Mandashari, the one that says that it's permitted, it's possible to fly with one wing, and therefore it can prevent itself from getting too badly hurt. Umanda, the one that says that it's prohibited, came in the Bahai Lomatzi Parach, Hainami Lomatzi Parach. Since it cannot fly with one wing, the other one also it's sort of prevented from flying with. V'hilchasa, and the halacha is that betray gapi aser, when two wings are stuck to this board, then it's going to be prohibited. And when one wing, bechad gapashar, when one wing is touches the board, but it still has use of the other wing, we're going to say that it's permitted. Okay, next case we have in the Mishnah Nishnabu of Tzlosa. If most of the ribs of the animal are broken, then it's going to be a problem. It's going to be considered a treifa. Tanur Rabbanan. This is the Rabbanim. The rabbis taught that Elohin Rov Tzlos, what is considered the majority of the ribs? Sheish Mikan, V'Sheish Mikan. Do we mean to say that there's 6 on each side? No, there's 6 on this side, 6 on that side, which is going to total 12. And 12 is going to be the majority because there's 11 on each side. So 12 is already more than half. And that amount of broken ribs will disqualify the animal. So what does it mean? Does it mean 6 on each side? 6 on each side. Oh, achas for mikan, achas mikan. Or you can have 11 broken on one side and one broken on the other side. Amar ziri. Mechetzian kalape shedra. And where does the break have to be? The half point of the rib, half point towards the spine. But if it's more inward than that, it's going to be okay. Amar Abba Bar Chana, Amar B'Yochanan. If it's los gedolos sheish b'moach. We're only talking about the large ribs, which have marrow in them. Thank you. Amar Ula ben Zakkai. Amar Ula ben Zakkai said, Nekru Barov Tzad Echad. So let's say if the ribs were uprooted, then even if it's only the majority of one side, it's a problem. In other words, in each side there's 11. So if 6 on one side get uprooted, the ribs get uprooted, that's going to be a problem. And if they broke and they didn't get uprooted, and that only disqualifies the animal when it's a total of 12 ribs damaged, which is the majority of both sides. But Rabbi Yochanan disagrees to this. It says bein nekru, bein nishtabru, whether it's broken or whether it's uprooted, whether it's broken, it's the majority. We go with the majority of both sides has to be broken, and that's what we say halacha. Halacha l'mais. That's how we rule. Amar Rav said, if a rib was uprooted and that vertebrae was uprooted with it, treifa, its corresponding vertebrae was uprooted with it, then it's gonna be treif. Yeah, even if just one rib is uprooted with its vertebrae, then it's gonna be not kosher. Amri le'Rav Kahana Rav Asi le'Rav Kahana Rav Asi asked Rav, Nekrat Selam Mikan, Vitselam Mikan. Let's say you have on two sides of the spine, you have one is uprooted from this side and one is uprooted from that side on one vertebrae. But the vertebrae itself is intact. Mahu. So what do we rule over there? I'm like Gister Kamri. So you're saying that you're considering this a gist. You're giving a case of a Gister. What's a Gister literally means? Like a broken pottery shard. it's a term that the Gemara uses to refer to a nevela. In other words, the animal it's not just a treif, it's not just a non-kosher, but it's considered as if the animal was like a dead animal. It just died. So these things aren't just a treif, it's a level up, it's a nevela. It's like a gister, like a broken pottery shard. So he said, gister comes, you're giving a case of a nevela. But Rav also said a case of the rib is uprooted with the vertebrae. So that also is a case of gistra. Ki kamer Rav, sela below chulya. No, Rav's talking about when the rib itself uprooted, but the vertebrae did not go along with it, and therefore that's not a case of gistra. That's not a case of nevela. It's only a problem of treifa. But he said if it uprooted it with the vertebrae. So we're going to re-explain. What did he mean to say? The rib and half of the vertebrae got uprooted, but it wasn't the full vertebrae, and therefore it's not going to be nevela. So that would imply from there mechlal. So let's go back to Rav's question. Now we understand that Rav's question was when the rib itself and part of the vertebrae got detached, but there's still part of the vertebrae there. So if Kahana and Ravasi, they're asking about something else. We're going to see what they're asking. So that seems to imply that they're asking about when there's a tzela below chulya amri. In other words, Rav asked when there's part of the chulya as well and part of the vertebrae. But they're asking when the rib detached, but no vertebrae got detached. But we said in other words, we have a statement earlier that said when it's broken, it's only problem if it's broken on two sides, on the majority of two sides. And when it's uprooted, there's an opinion that says that it's only uprooted when it's the majority one side. But there's no opinion that it says when it's only on one side, when it's only two on each side. It has to be at least the majority of one side. So how can Ravami and Rasi, how can the case they gave of one on each side, be a problem? No, over there when it's talking about when it uprooted, the same way that we had earlier, it's talking about when they're not directly opposite each other. They're not corresponding ribs. But when with the statement that I said earlier, that when they're uprooted, it's the majority one side, or when it's broken, it's the majority of two sides. Then that has to be that's going to be zesh lo keneged zeh. In other words, even when they're not opposite each other, it's still a problem if you have such a number. But when you have opposite each other, even if it's only two, one opposite another, it's still going to be a problem. Well, yes, so that's very good according to Ula ben Zakeh that we mentioned, that he says that when it's uprooted, it's the majority one side. So you can have a bunch of uprooted ribs, but there's none zeh keneged zeh. There's none opposite each other to get an immediate disqualification once it's a number of two. But we have the other opinion is Shitas Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that once there's a majority of two sides, that it only disqualifies once there's a majority of two sides. In other words, there's 22 ribs total, and you need 12 ribs to disqualify it. But when you have majority of two sides, it's impossible to have one, at least in some point, one opposite another. So then, well before you hit this point of 12 ribs uprooted, you have the point of zeh keneged zeh, which should disqualify it. So why do we wait for the point of the majority of both sides? So hasam buchna belasita, there when the ribs uprooted without any part of the vertebrae. Hacha buchna masita, over here, when Ravasi and Ravana are asking of a case that it was uprooted with a little bit of the vertebrae as well, and that's a little more problematic than the case that we had that it's just the rib uproots. But then the Gemara asking that the obvious question we said before, we explained the Rav's question was when it got uprooted with a part of the vertebrae. Then if so, they're asking the same question that Rav asked. So Gemara answers Lo Shmi'alahu de Rav. They didn't hear what Rav said. If they would have heard what he said, they would have known that it's a problem. So let them ask it. Like Rav, they asked if two of them were broken. If it's on opposite sides, if two of them on opposite sides are broken. Why didn't they just ask if one of them is broken? They don't even know the answer to one. Why are they asking two already? Savri. So they thought, I'll ask about one. The first I'll ask one question, which will give us two answers. In other words, instead of asking both questions, let's say we can only ask one of the questions. Let's just ask the question we'll understand from that question both answers. If we ask about one, if we say if one spine got uprooted with part of the vertebrae, and he answers us, if he says then it's not good, then definitely if anything more than one is broken, is uprooted with part of the vertebrae, then that's definitely a problem. But let's say he tells us that it's okay. Let's say he tells us it's okay. Still we have a question. What would we rule when there's two of them? We don't know because he said one is kosher, but two might be a problem, might not be a problem. We have no proof either way. So if so, so to here when we're asking about two of them, there should seemingly be no way to tell whether one of them is a problem or not. But if he said it's treifa, if they ask about two and he says not okay, then in the case of one, we don't know whether it's okay or not. So Savri, they thought that if one's going to be a problem as well, he's going to get upset at them. He's going to say, "Wait, it's simple. One of them is the problem. So what you're asking about two of them? Why are you asking about two of them?" So they can understand from that he got upset at them and he told them off, and he told them and he clearly would tell them that one wouldn't be a problem as well. And if he wouldn't say anything, that would mean that one was not a problem. So because what would he say to them? If one of them is not good, tartim by, then it's two even a question. You shouldn't be asking that. And from the fact that he didn't say that, he wouldn't, and from the fact they wouldn't say that, they would deduce from that it would be okay. And if he would say that, they would understand that they're both a problem. Both if it's one of them is uprooted with part of the vertebrae, and if two of them are uprooted. I mean, definitely if two of them. So the Gemara says, yeah, but they asked him about two, and he told them that it's a gistra. And we know from what Rav's previous statement that even one is a problem. And he didn't get mad at them, so they wouldn't. You see, they wouldn't know that one's a problem. So the Gemara answers, "Came the ka'amr lahu gister ka'amrisu." Since he said gister, you're saying you're giving case of an avela. You got to say you made a strong exclamation. That's his sort of getting angry, so to speak. In other words, he gave a strong statement, and from that strong statement, they understood that even one is okay, is a problematic. Amar Rabba Bar Shel said, Amar Masna, and he quoted Masna, Amar Shmuel, Nekrat Sela, Mekar, if a rib got uprooted from its source, from where it's attached, V'gogolas, and a skull Shenechbas Abruba that was, the majority of it was crushed, Ubasar Achofas Ravakaris, and the meat that's covering the majority of the stomachs, Biruba, that had a problem, that had a cut in it, the majority of it, Treifa, it's going to be a treifa. It's going to be disqualified animal. Nekrat Selamekar. So now that we're going to analyze these statements. So he said the first thing he listed was if a rib got uprooted from the source, from where it's attached. Nekrat Selamekar treifa. V'raminu, I'm going to ask, Kama chisaron b'shedra. We have machlokas regarding tuma ba'ol. In other words, a mace, a dead body is metame in a number of ways. One of them is if there's something covering over it. If it's literally means tent. If something's a roof over, it has a roof over it, and someone else is under that same roof, and that person becomes impure from the mace, from the dead body. Kama chisaron b'shedra. But if it's missing certain parts of it, and it's not a whole body, then it's not going to be mitame. So if it's a skeleton, it's just the bones of the skeleton, it's going to be mitame unless it's missing a certain amount. So what's that amount that it has to be missing, that it's not mitame, it's not going to make someone else impure? On the spine, it has to be missing two vertebrae in order for it not to be mitame anymore. Even if it's only missing one, it's not mitame anymore. We go like that for treifa as well. In other words, Beishami would say if it's missing two vertebrae, it's going to be problematic, and Beisil would say even if it's only missing one, it's going to be treifa, it's going to be problematic.
So this time, Hillel is stricter than.
So what depends, by Treifa, Hillel is going to be stricter than Beis Shammai, because he says it's Treif even if it's only missing one vertebrae.
Right.
But by Tumah, Beis Shammai, Hillel is going to be more lenient than Beis Shammai, because he says even if it's only missing one vertebrae, it doesn't make something else impure.
Okay.
And over here, we're talking about a rib without a vertebrae. So even for treifa. So over here too, it should be a problem. We should show from here. We should show from here that it's not a problem unless it's missing a chulya. In other words, here it's not missing a vertebrae. So just because the rib cracked, it shouldn't be a problem. So we answer no. Over here, it's a rib with a rib's missing without a vertebrae. That could be a problem. And over there, it's a vertebrae is missing without a rib. So in other words, these are two distinct treifas, two distinct problems. They're not the same thing. A rib broken can hurt it, and also a vertebrae missing or broken can harm it. And Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are only talking about the vertebrae; they're not talking about the ribs itself. So the Gemara says, I can understand why you have a rib that doesn't have a vertebrae broken with it. You can find it. In other words, just the rib breaks off. But how can you have a vertebrae that's broken, that's missing, and the tzela, nothing happened to it? And the tzela is still there. It has nowhere to be attached. So further down along the spine, you could find it, because there are, as you go along, there are areas where there's no ribs coming out of it. There's just the vertebrae. So over here, this ends up being a leniency of Beis Shammai and a chomer Beis Hillel by treifus, because Beis Hillel said it comes treif even if it's only missing one chulya. So we have a certain area in Yedidya. We mentioned a whole bunch of things that are a leniency of Beis Shammai and a stringency of Beis Hillel. Normally, Beis Hillel is the one lenient one, and Beis Shammai is the stringent one. But here we have a case that by treifus, at least, Beis Hillel is the stringent one. Amar le Rav. So Rav says, Ki chalin tuma. No, the question in the Mishnah they're talking about is regarding tumah, regarding impure, making something else impure, with tumas mace, with the impurity of a dead body. So over there, Beis Shammai is actually the chomer. Beis Shammai is more stringent because he says it's still matame, it still can make something else impure until it's missing two vertebrae, but until that point, it's still matame. So in that case, he's the stringent one. Then the next thing he mentioned was Vigolgolas and a skull. That was the majority was crushed. By Rabbi Yomi asked, Rav Gova or Rav Akefa? What does it mean? It doesn't mean the majority of the height was crushed. In other words, the area above the eyes was all crushed. From the eyes up was all crushed. That's the majority of the height. Or Rav Akefa, or maybe the majority of the circumference of the head of the circle around it was crushed. In other words, are we going with length or width, basically? In other words, just the majority of the height, but not necessarily the whole surface area of the head. Is that a problem? Or maybe it has to be the whole width, the surface area, the circumference, but the height, even if it's not the majority of the height, it's still going to be a problem. Ubasar, the next issue he mentioned was Basar Achofe Rova Keres Beruba. The meat, the basar, that's covering the majority of the stomach, Berubo. And if most of that they had a cut in it, it's a problem. So what does it mean? Is most of it, the majority of it has to be ripped to be a problem, or most of it has to be missing to be a problem? Tifshalei. So we're going to answer, like me, this is not we learned the Mishnah, he missed the inner stomach, shenikva, shenikra, that got punctured or torn, rova chitzona. So if the inner stomach was punctured, shenikra, or it was torn, or the rova chitzona, the majority of the outer stomach was torn. And we mentioned earlier that one of the opinions that explained what is the rova chitzona, what is the primus, and what is the chitzona, what is the inner stomach, what is the outer stomach. He said that it was kol keres kulo zor keres pnimi. The entire inside stomach is considered the keres pnimi. Veidzo keres chitzon, and what's considered the outer stomach? Basar chofes rova keres. In other words, earlier there were a bunch of opinions. We had keres opinion. There's a bunch of opinions. Is the bottom, is the side, is a narrow area. One of the opinions was it's the whole stomach, and then there's another thing. That's the inner one, and there's another thing called the outer one. What's the outer one? That's the meat, the flesh that covers the rov keres. And if so, if you understand like that, sorry, veidzo. That was the shit. Let's read that. The entire stomach, that's the inner stomach. That's the flesh that covers the majority of the stomach. And we said, and based on that explanation, we were reading in the Mishnah, if the inner stomach, meaning the entire stomach that punctured, or the outer stomach, meaning the flesh around the body, tore, that's an issue. So we see from here, which our question was, is it most of it missing or most of it torn? And we're talking about torn. So Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Rav Nachman Bar Yaakov Bar Nachmani Amar Shmuel Makam She'ein Bo Milas. No, sorry, Midiu Time El Shmuel. This is only according to Shmuel. This whole question was a question according to Shmuel, because if we notice the statement of these three disqualifications of the rib that was uprooted and the skull that was crushed, and the basar chofes rova keres, the meat that had the meat that covered the majority of the stomach that had a problem in it. That's all Shmuel. And Shmuel explained what the keres apnimi is. Shmuel or makash emilos. He said it's sort of the underside of the animal, where the stomach part that's facing that, which doesn't have as much here or there. And on that he said is the keres apnimis. So therefore his explanation, he was understanding of the Mishnah is that area is the keres apnimis, and the rest of the keres, the rest of the stomach itself, is considered the chitzona. So we don't have a proof from there to his statement, because the Mishnah is not talking at all about the basar achov of the meat that's covering the majority of the keres. And we have no proof, according to Shmuel, we have no proof from the Mishnah. Should we stop here?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.